Well, that's a very valuable insight, I think. Can we come then to you're very strong on data and facts, which seem to matter less in the age of identity politics, I might add, than emotions and feelings and tribalism. But what are the real numbers in terms of police killings in America and if you like, the racial background of those who are shot or killed? As I understand it, they're quite revealing. And in fact, in a nation of what, 330, 340 million, with the reputation America, if I can be frank, has now for violence, the numbers of people, men, and mainly men anyway, who are shot, surprisingly low. But can you give us a bit of a feel as to just how racially they break down?
Sure. So roughly, this is I'm summarizing from the past 5 years of data. Roughly 1,000 Americans are killed every year by a police firing a weapon. Of those 1,000, usually 95% are armed at the time that they're killed, and the policeman or woman made a decision to pull the trigger on an armed suspect who was viewed as dangerous on account of being armed. Now, not all of those were justified, perhaps, but it's generally safe to assume that most of those are cases where a cop is doing his or her job correctly by, you know, um, eliminating a genuine threat to other people. So that leaves about 50 unarmed Americans killed every year in a country of 330 million that has something on the order of 10 million arrests every year. 50 end up with a person who's unarmed getting killed. Now, of those 50, the majority are white, or at minimum, the largest group are white. Usually about 40 to 50% of that subset are white, and almost all men. Usually anywhere from 25 to 35% of unarmed Americans shot by the cops are black. And then the rest are Hispanic largely, and very few are Asian. So if you look at that disparity at face value, it can seem like there's racism there because black people make up 14% of the population total, but about 35% of unarmed Americans that get shot by cops. So you can say, why isn't it 14%? Doesn't that indicate that there's a racial bias? The problem with that is you have to adjust for other variables. The cops aren't randomly, knocking on people's doors and encountering different citizens of different races equally. The cops are largely they're responding to 911 calls. And the cops get more 911 calls from black neighborhoods because of the underlying facts of racially disparate crime, which is to say, black people are about 7 times more likely to commit and suffer homicide, for which we have the most reliable data. Which means that if you're getting 7 times as many homicide calls from the black community as you would expect based on population alone, you just have more opportunities for things to go wrong to begin with. So once you control for that variable, once you control for all of these important variables, all of the studies, or the vast majority of the most rigorous studies, especially the one done by Harvard economist Roland Fryer, who admitted that the results surprised him, is that there is not an anti-black bias in a cop's likelihood of pulling the trigger. But the other thing the studies tend to find is cops are quicker to put their hands on or rough up a black or Hispanic suspect. I don't think that we have a clear picture of why that is. It could be due to racial bias. And no doubt, I think there are racist cops, and there are There's a wider set of just whether or not they're racist cops, they're bad cops. And there's a huge problem with the police being held accountable when they abuse people. So I'm not minimizing any of that. I'm just to the specific question of whether there is an epidemic of cops killing unarmed black people. It's not true.
Seems to me that you made a very interesting point there, that the 911 calls, different numbers in our country, but the emergency calls often originate from black people looking for protection. They have every interest in, I would have thought, building a better, more effective, more wisely trained and educated, if you like, police force rather than deconstructing a police force, which is obviously the objective of a lot of white elites who are arguing, it seems in your country, for depolicing. Seems to me to be the worst possible solution and shows a real lack of understanding or perhaps even interest in the facts.
I agree with everything you just said, except that it's not just the white elites, it's also activists, black activists, white activists, activists of every color are calling for, who are in their own way a kind of elite. Your point is well taken in that it's not the typical person, black, white, or other, who wants to defund the police. And polls show that, the majority of black Americans do not think that's a good idea. And as you also say, often improving a given institution can require funding it more sometimes. We often, when we talk about public schools failing in this country, no one suggests that few people suggest that the solution is just to defund the public schools, as if taking away money from an institution will magically translate into them being more proficient at their jobs. Often it's the case that police officers in America are undertrained. Often it's the case that they're overworked. Both of those problems potentially call for more funding, not less. So again, I don't ever mean to minimize the abuses which exist and the fundamental accountability problem. That is to say, in America, if you're a cop, it is extremely hard to get punished for anything you do, short of shooting someone while they're lying face down in the back. Short of that, it is extremely difficult to face consequences for anything. And that goes whether the victim of the cop is white, black, purple, or whatever. So that's a problem. And we have to find a way to fix that without going too far and making it impossible for cops to do their job. That is a genuinely tough problem. Anyone who says there's a simple answer is selling you snake oil. Period. It's just a tough thing.
I can really accept what you're saying there, but I think that my biggest takeout would be the worst way to approach this problem is to simply ruthlessly attack the police as an unwanted evil. That's simply, we're all human. They'll just turn inward on themselves and become defensive. You've got to start with an attitude that says, we need policing, it's an honourable profession, how do we fix the problems, rather than we want to get rid of you because you're all a pack of, Stalinists.
No, it's true. I mean, I've attended many of the protests in New York and Washington, D.C., and the rhetoric is, I don't, can I curse on your show?
Yeah. Go ahead.
I'm just to faithfully describe the rhetoric. NYPD suck my dick was one of the main chants. And people would get in the police's face and flip them off, and almost you can feel them almost hoping for a fight. Some of them.
Yeah.
Most of the protesters don't do this. Most of the protesters discourage it. But there's a minority within them who love provoking the cops, getting up close to their face, almost spitting in their face, and using profanity like that. Whether or not a lot of these cops, by the way, are black and Hispanic. In New York, like half the cops in the city are black and Hispanic. So, yes,
pretty tough for them.
Yes, it's a strange situation to be in, to be to be a black police officer that is hearing, it's the one situation where a white person, it's acceptable on the American left for a white person to say something horrible to a black person, as if the black person happens to be a cop. It's the only time they'll allow that kind of thing, or perhaps like a black conservative. But if we want, like, we need police to be an attractive profession.
Yeah.
Because one of the big problems, and Ray Kelly, the former NYPD commissioner, New York Police Department commissioner, made this point, is that a lot of times police departments are hiring their problems. They're hiring bad apples. I'm not saying the problem is only a matter of bad apples. It goes far beyond that. It's a matter of systemic incentives and so forth. But there's, in addition to that, a problem of hiring people who should not have been cops, who should not have passed the screen into being cops. Why do police departments have to do this? Because not that many people want to be cops. It's a dirty profession. In some ways, it's one of the 20 deadliest professions. A cop gets shot almost every day in America. That's another thing that's not true I imagine it can't be true in Australia.
No.
After your gun reform, it's definitely not true in Europe. But here in America, a cop gets shot almost every day. In addition to that, there's a portion of the country that hates you because you're a cop. Most jobs like that, people don't want to sign up to be hated. The average salary is something like $50,000, $55,000, which is good but not great. So we want a bigger applicant pool to begin with so that we can get the cream of the crop. We want to be able to, in theory, bump up the salary for cops so that we can attract people who would have otherwise gone into a higher paying profession to become cops. That's part of the way that we're going to get to more healthy relationships between police and civilians and higher quality police. How can we do that if we demonize the cops? If we make it the kind of, I imagine, what is the typical black 12-year-old in America, who isn't going to go to college because it's not really for him? How are his attitudes being shaped towards the possibility of becoming a cop right now? If you grow up in this era, you'd almost have to be crazy to want to become a cop. You'd have to have a really strange level of, being able to shun the zeitgeist and to go against the crowd, which means that, there's going to be fewer black cops, maybe even fewer white cops. I don't know. And the ones, in any way, it's just going to distort the applicant pool. I worry that it is. I don't have necessarily strong evidence, but
so
it's something to worry about.
As trust and goodwill and faith in our institutions breaks down right across the West, this is actually true of a lot of professions. I for many years was in public service as an elected member, but the disincentives, ironically, people sort of say, oh, they're only in it to line their own nests, they're all corrupt, they're all this, they're all that. And that just discourages good people, the very people you want, from taking up the profession. It makes it a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. They're no good, so they end up being no good. You don't solve the problem, you actually make it worse.
Thank you for watching this episode. We appreciate your support. If you value vital conversations like this one, be sure to subscribe to the channel there and also click the notification bell to stay up to date with new releases.